Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Occult Explorers. I'm Snappy, and thank you for joining me for our episode today on the dreaming. And we have with us our special guests today, Leslie Selene. How's it going, Leslie? Oh, you're muted,
Muted.
Leslie.
Doing good.
So glad you could join us. And of course, our
Me
dear
too.
friend, Shay deMontford. How are you, Shay?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm out at the moment camping, but that hasn't stopped me joining you.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. We're going to have just a fun, kind of casual episode today. We're really excited to talk with Shay. She is in, you were just telling us you have written a book, you submitted it to the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and you're hoping to
Mm,
get some funding. So talk
mm.
to us a bit about what you're working on here.
Okay, so what I've written is a book. It'll be slightly controversial because it's called Kadicha. Kadicha is it sort of translates as magic man, as much as the concept of magic exists within Indigenous culture. They don't really see spirituality and magic as separate from daily life. It was mundane in the sense that, life is magic, magic is life, we're all connected. We were just chatting about that before we went live. And yeah, so spirituality in Indigenous culture is not separated. But the Kadacha were a little bit of a boogeyman figure. So a lot of Indigenous don't like to talk about them. Unfortunately, there is a lot of Indigenous in Australia who are separated from their own culture. And it's been a bit of a deliberate thing. Like I am Wiradjuri woman, which means I have Wiradjuri ancestry, which goes back to like the Blue Mountains, Lithgow area. But nobody in my family was willing to acknowledge that until recently. So it's been one of those things. And when I found out, like my Indigenous friends for ages have been going, "You've got a black soul. You're black. You're black. You've got a black soul," and to find out that there is some genetic stuff there as well. Um, and we've done on country events down with the Wiradjuri, and they were like saying, you're part of the tribe, girl." And for them to actually acknowledge that and accept me was good, but I had to accept it in my own head.
Right.
I'm in a fortunate position where, from being a little girl, my father used to deliver petrol to a big place here that was an Indigenous centre called Flay's Fauna Reserve. And the aunties there, I used to go with him because I loved them, because they would make a big fuss of me. They'd take me, they'd tell me the stories. And I didn't realise that they were giving me what's like a kid's initiation. So the dreaming, and most of what we know of the dreaming stories are just like children learning about how the world works. And then you have your teenage initiations, which is like women's business, men's business. And then you have special initiations as you go on. And unbeknownst to me, the Indigenous community had made sure that I'd had several of these initiations as I was
Yeah.
going through my life. And some of them expect them to be big dramatic things. Like there are some cultures that men cut their chests and get horizontal scars, and they knock their front teeth out because, hey, they were, in those days, something was going to happen and your front teeth would get knocked out anyway. So they knocked them out early. But some of them are subtle. Some of them are like, go spend a certain amount amount of time at a place. And at 17, my biggest initiation, like one of the aunties, I was talking to her about Springbrook, and she said, "Yeah, that's where your soul is. If you're ever in doubt of who you are, right, go up there for a while." So I ran away from my family and just lived there for 3 days. There was no shops and things around in those days up there, and I later on found out that that's what you're supposed to do as a teenager. You go to your sacred soul spot and you're supposed to stay there for 3 days. And there were some amazing things that happened while I was there. And
That's a beautiful
yeah,
synchronicity. You kind of were just
yeah.
naturally led. Yeah.
Oh, that's how it's supposed to happen in Indigenous
Right.
culture. It's supposed to just be a part of life, not a
Right.
big thing. This is just what happens. And so it's really been nice that the advice from these aunties and uncles just at the right time have been what's prompted me to move in that way. And now the aunties and uncles are saying, look, don't listen to what some people say. The Indigenous community needs you to release this book, and the rest of Australia will learn something as well. Mm.
Beautiful, beautiful. Wow, that's
Mm.
so interesting.
Mhm.
What do you think, Leslie?
So,
What do I think? Oh, I'm
Mhm.
wrapped. I'm listening. It's to me, it's the opposite side of the planet. I've never been. Well, the
mm,
closest I've been is Bali and Thailand.
mm,
I've never been to Australia. I've always been so curious. And I read Tyson Yunkaporta's book more recently.
mm,
Um, but like as you said, and the way Italian witchcraft was
mm,
until everyone agreed that it was time, you
mm,
know, then nobody
mm,
talked about it. And
mm,
it was only in secret, and then you were expelled from your coven if you
mm,
divulged the secrets, and all this
mhm,
stuff was going on. But they did have this prophecy at a certain time. This will open up, and Raven was the one who called it, and Giovanni was the one who put it in action, and then it completely opened up. So
mm,
I imagine, I would hope that
mm,
there would be something like that there
mm.
too.
Yeah, it's different here to Europe. In like when I've gone to Europe, when I've gone to England, you can trip over a sacred site like 2 miles down the road, you know.
Oh,
But here, if you
the
to go to this,
distances.
because the country's so big, the
Yeah,
sacred sites are so far apart, and it's
yeah,
really a journey to get to them. So you have to actually put in a big effort to go to the sacred sites here. And some of them are monstrously old. Like they actually have a stone circle out the back of Mullumbimby, which is not far from where I live. But and they estimate that that was older than Stonehenge.
yeah.
But the council went, oh yeah, Indigenous didn't do Stonehenges, so the council dismantled it. They
What?
took
Right.
Yeah. So we have these sort of bizarre things happening here. But fortunately, it's been well documented enough by the locals. The locals have pictures of it. And two locals, in particular, the Evanses, have been pushing to have the stones returned
So they know where
and
the
for this to
stones
be,
are.
yeah, oh, well, they've been piled up and put into a corner sort of thing. So, yeah,
So
so they
recent.
yes, I know. And this sort of thing is happening a lot. Like Australia's going through a big development period. And where I live, Springbrook is an amazing site, but there's a plan because it's a World Heritage Site that our council thinks, wow, what a great tourist opportunity for our Summer Olympics, which is going to be here in, I think, 30, I'm not sure if it's 32 or 36. I don't know much about sports. But anyway, they're trying to push to put 520,000 tourists through there a year, you know, with these little, like, they would have to do so much infrastructure to support that. It would actually destroy it being a World Heritage Site,
It's so
and
depressing. Ugh,
yeah. So I
I
think it's good that this book comes out because I feel like they've got to understand that Indigenous culture is very much about balance, and the Kadaitcha man was not somebody like you might think of him as like his place in society was there's 4 levels of spirituality within Indigenous culture. There's like what everybody learns, and then there's your initiations when you're a teenager and you get your marriage totems. But then there's the Kadaitcha, that if something went wrong, they straighten it out. And above the Kadaitcha, there's the Orisha. And a lot of Indigenous people don't even know about Orishas and what they are. But the Kadaitcha was judge, jury, and executioner. So if you can imagine a priest, like a Western priest, that's half Judge Dredd, that's what a Kadaitcha was. So if
Wow.
something went really wrong, he came and straightened it out. But he didn't see it as vengeance or execution or anything like that. He just saw it as restoring the balance.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this
So
grand
yeah,
design or whatever.
Well, hold
yeah,
on.
yeah. It all has
What
to
are
be in
the
balance.
what
Mhm.
are the Orisha there?
The Orisha, there weren't ever many of them in Australia, and they cover like a large area. And so the way that I tell other Indigenous to visualize it is if Queensland was a, a big area for a religion, right, you might have a lot of Kadaitcha, which are the cardinals, but the Pope for Queensland would be the Orisha.
Mm.
So we only ever had like, I think there was that, like in Indigenous culture, you have sevens and nines happen, and I believe in history there was sometimes there were 7 orishas and sometimes there were 9.
Huh.
Yeah, so for an area, but all the Kadaitcha sort of reported to them if something went wrong. The orisha stayed hidden in a mountain. You never saw them unless there was a big problem, and then he or she, they could be either, would turn up, and they would make sure that the Kadaitcha did what was necessary to restore the balance, because the balance was
So
important.
they're kind of
Yeah.
these high priests that are hidden away, sort of doing mystical stuff, or
Hermits.
off
Yeah.
on their own. And they
Yes.
kind
Keeping
of
the
would
flow. Yeah.
be in charge of large areas of the countryside, and people could go to
Wow.
them to get basically like legal and magical advice, like the other Kadaichas could go to them or could seek them out in
Yeah.
times of need.
Yeah. Mostly the Kadaitchas would go to them. I think very few
Hmm.
of the general public ever saw them. They're very sort of mythic
Right,
creatures. And that's why
right.
some
Near myth.
people think,
Wow.
yeah, but they're very much real people. And we have
Hmm.
them documented not only within Indigenous culture, but also the museums have documented them as well.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
wow. That's
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. So at the moment, they say, oh no, all the orishas have died out. There's none left. But no, they've always been hidden. And Springbrook is supposed to be a place where one of the orishas was and was hidden away. So if we do end up in trouble up there, hopefully he or she will stand up and help us sort it out. But there's always been things on Springbrook Mountain. Like there was a developer up there years ago who was trying to bring in cableways and start to push things. And, he was down directing things and a big tree fell on him, splat, and everything came to a halt after that. So, yeah. And that's sort of the way that things happen within Indigenous culture to bring the
Yeah, it takes
balance.
care of itself. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
one thing I want to
So
ask
there's,
you about, oh, sorry, you
mhm,
go ahead, Leslie.
No, no.
Okay. One thing I wanted to ask you about is this. So one thing I am very familiar with, or at least in the literature, is this dream time thing. And I've done a fair amount of research into it, both in the traditional, well, in the anthropological and in the new age. But I want to
mhm,
get someone who's involved in its perspective, right? Because what we see in, modern anthropology has really had this kind of retraction and this re-examining of itself. And there's been just so much racism and so much,
mm,
nonsense. So
mhm,
when I go into the anthropological literature, especially the recent stuff, there's all of this retraction and
mm,
saying that a lot of the dream time stuff was made up. A lot of it was manufactured
Well,
by
I think
Westerners.
there it was
mm,
projected the
Yes,
Oneric realm as
yes,
mm,
we knew it, which had
mm,
been
yes,
suppressed, so we forgot we knew it, so we didn't even know to call it that. But that's what we were
mm,
yeah.
projecting onto their
mm,
dream time, which, from what I
mm,
understand, is a more all the time thing, not just a
mm,
nighttime
Well,
thing.
so the big
mm,
thing that I kept seeing was in the anthropological literature, now they talk about dream time as this sort of mythic time. So the ancient fire path. So when we're talking
mhm,
about myths of how we discovered fire, it happened in the dream time. And
mhm,
this is, but then it gets very dependent upon various cultural groups because other cultural
mm,
groups have more expanded understanding of the dreaming. But this is what they'll
mm,
say as a general
mm,
rule. There's a
mm,
mythic time that's called the dreaming. But
mm,
when we get into the new age and to the occult side, which claims connection to the
mm,
aboriginal, there's this
mm,
whole expanded universe of talking to
mm,
people and
mm,
talking to
mm.
animals in the dream time and meeting
Yeah.
your dream animal. And it
Mm,
gets into this whole universe of shamanism. And it's
mm,
both,
There's plenty of crossover. It's not like there's a lane for dreaming and a lane for
mm,
not dreaming. Like,
no.
hopefully
mm,
not while I'm driving,
mm,
but
mm,
definitely while I'm camping, I would be in the
mm,
So
interface. No.
what I'm trying to figure out is, is this what we see like with Aradia, where it's religion studies being overly reactionary on itself? Or is this legitimate racism? Or how
ah,
far does this go? Like, you know what I mean? It's so hard for me as someone who's removed to make
mm,
sense of this and to try to
okay.
figure out where it goes. What is authentic? I mean, what is authentic is a silly idea, but how much is this new age occult stuff actually connected to Aborigine dreaming? Is it as made up as the anthropologists are claiming? Now,
Okay.
now,
Great multi-layered question. And
right,
and each
right,
part sort of has a multi-layered answer.
yeah,
So and I'll try and be as direct. And
okay,
if there are any Indigenous people watching, please give me your input as well. But this is how their dreaming works. Yes, some is made up. A lot of it's made up. I mean, most of the new age is made up. Right. So, and they love to cross cultures. Right.
yes, yes,
But, all right, it you will find Indigenous people will make stuff up as well. If you put an Indigenous person on the spot and they don't know their own dreaming, it's really embarrassing. So they will make something up. So it's not just the Westerners who have done this, it's also been Indigenous culture, right? Um, and Indigenous people know this and they want it to stop, but it's like, to stop that, you've got to stop the anthropologists going, well, tell me about this and tell me about that, because that's not how it happens. It happens in life.
right,
Now, with the dreaming, again, we've got at least two levels there. You know, there is definitely the magical occult stream, and the Kadaitcha are very much in that stream, and we'll go back to them and talk more about them. But the dreaming that we see in kids' books and things like that, that's okay to share, because it's like your Grimm brothers fairy tale.
Right.
Above and beyond being how an origin story, what it is the way the balance is kept is with song and story. So if you get a teenager and they're going off the rails, right, and they're really doing the wrong thing, even today, right, what they will try and do is they get them to sit in circle with the aunties, and all the aunties, well, they call it talk at them. But what the aunties will do is they go around in a circle and they tell them a story or sing them a song, right? And you know how sometimes you hear a song and it just, oh, I got that, it just hits you here. So that's what the songs are for. It's to correct the imbalance within the person, right? But a story can do that too, right? Like, what you're doing reminds me of a time in the dreaming when,
it gives you
right?
another perspective, right? Exactly.
Yeah, and it
That can be
shows you
enough to
that you're out
ground
of
you.
balance. Yeah,
Yeah,
and with most myths, there's an and or, you know,
yeah.
like
What myths do, right?
yeah,
They
Tidlik.
cause you to contemplate.
One of the
So
one of the
when
ones
it's
we know
like
is
that,
Gemlet.
then the dreaming is like saying once upon a time.
It's very much so.
Huh.
Yes, very much so. But there is inside that there is symbolism that is very, very deep.
Huh.
So I'll give you an example of a story that a lot of people know about. It's called Tidlik, the Great Frog. So Tidlik was a great big toad, right, that was living in Australia, great big frog. And the kids teased him and they upset him. So what Tidlik did was he went down to like a big body of water here, because he wasn't being respected, and he swallowed up all the water. And because he swallowed the water, there was dryness, right? And there was drought, and Brother Kangaroo started dying, and Brother Cockatoo was having a really hard time. So everybody decided to have a council and go, what can we do about that? So we got all the animals, all the people in a circle, and said, how can we get Tidlik to let go of the waters so we stop the drought and stop everybody dying? And they all tried something. And finally, the snake came forward. And Brother Snake stood up on his tail and got in front of Tidlik. And he started to do this ridiculous dance on the tip of his tail. And he slithered and he wrestled with another snake, and he did this ridiculous dance. And Tidlik's corners of his mouth started to go up. And finally, he couldn't help himself anymore. He just opened his mouth and started laughing. And out came all the water, and everybody was saved. So
Beautiful.
what we can do is go, yeah, that's a kid's story about drought, how drought happens if there's imbalance in the land. But also you have a look at that on a personal level. So if you're telling that to a teenager, there are times when teenagers clam up and they go emotionally dry, right? And how do you banish that demon? How do you get the waters to flow again? by getting your sense of humor to happen.
Yeah.
All right. Listen to the ones that will make you laugh. All the community is here for you and they are trying, but don't take yourself so seriously. All right. So that's so the dreaming is like it's a basic kid story about drought, and we've got to respect the land and have balance in the land. If not, the water will get eaten up. But it's also an emotional story as well. You know,
Right.
so they're multi-layered. In my book, what I've done is I've created a fictional antagonist who has done something horrendous. So it's not a fluffy book. There's some horrendous crimes that have been committed against Indigenous people in this country, and we need to own it, right? Both the perpetrators and the victims, like because the victims have done things to antagonise the perpetrators, and there was consequences for that. But then in the end, we've got to stop this antagonism and restore balance. So
Truth
this
and
guy
reconciliation.
literally, yeah. So I've literally taken him on a journey through this book where he runs into people that keep telling him stories. And the stories are true. The stories that people have told me about massacres and what were the consequences of the massacres or horrendous things that have happened. And he doesn't, and he's running away, trying to run away from all of this. He doesn't want to hear it, which is what most people, when they have a problem, they don't want to hear the answer to the problem. But there's always a price to pay. You have to pay the price. But then there's restoration and balance, right? So you know, and there's a thing in Indigenous culture called the Marban man. The Marban man is often the balance for the Kadaitcha. Like the Kadaitcha, people think of the Kadaitcha kills, the Marban man heals, but it's more than that. They can both do a bit of that, right? But in the end, you know, his journey takes him around where the Marban man brings this healing and this restoration.
Okay,
And
so I'm trying to understand.
yeah,
So like the Kadaicha comes basically when you need like a judge, right?
mhm,
Someone to pass
mhm,
judgment when things have gotten
Saturn.
out of the local community's hands, like in extraordinary situations. Need someone
mhm,
who can make that final, you know, horrible action when and if necessary. So
mhm.
then what is the Maman is coming, sorry, however you say that word, is coming,
Marban,
Maban,
Maban. Mhm, mhm,
he's coming around and they're offering like regularly healing for the community, or are they coming after the judge to heal after
But in my
like
story, they are. In my story, they
okay.
are. But they
Mm,
were, again, part of life. This
mm,
is a person with a gift for healing that's taken young and trained, just like the Kadaitcha. The Kadaitcha were
mm,
people that displayed psychic abilities, and they were taken and trained when they were young to be the next generation of Kadaitcha. But they are trained up to do mostly healing.
mm,
Um, and it's interesting that the origin stories of the Marban always involve a dingo, right? Like sometimes the creation of the dingo or dingoes being with them. So it's very interesting with the phenomenon of assistance dogs today, right? Because these
mhm.
assistance dogs, by their very presence, bring healing. So
Wow.
protection and healing. So that's sort of like the totem for the Marban man. So like it's a bit of a Dianic sort of a totem.
Right,
If
right,
you
right.
see the dingoes coming in, you see the dogs coming in, then we're getting the healing. Yeah.
I
And
think about
does
the
the
dogs of
Maban
Asclepius. Sorry, go
does
ahead.
the
Mm.
Maban live with the people or in the caves like the Orisha?
No, they're part of the community. The
And the
Kadaitcha,
Kadai just part of the community too.
he's usually off by himself. He gets a separate burial. So he's not buried with the Indigenous used to practice air burials here where you put them up in the air, wrap them up in bark and put them up in the air. That's since become illegal, right, for health reasons.
Yeah.
It's actually very healthy because they're up away and the carrion bird takes it away very quickly. The body's dealt with very quickly. Um, and there's a lot of Indigenous culture. We talk about freedom of religion, but anybody who does deal with Indigenous spirituality very quickly realizes that Kadaitcha is banned. There's certain aspects of, our burials and things like that are all banned. Right? They still don't allow them to practice their full religion. They come out and smudge on country, which is very questionable as to whether or not that was ever originally a traditional thing that they did in the way that they're doing it now. They certainly did smudge, but, did they do it as a welcome on country thing? We don't know. And the parts that are socially acceptable, because the Kadacha were actually very much part of the rebellion that happened here. Not a lot of, we know about in America, there were the Indian Wars, but over here they're calling it the frontier incursions or the frontier times, right? So, and that's usually where they've come into a violent confrontation with the Indigenous groups as they've tried to expand further and further west and take away their sacred watering holes, which has repercussions today. Like, we have mining companies that go into negotiate, and I put one of these stories in the book where the Kadacha has to bring balance. But this mining company spent ages negotiating because they didn't want to end up in a land rights court with the local Indigenous about building a big smelter for aluminium. And they went, look, we just need this peninsula because this is our main songline where our souls will go and jump off. And they have to go back to a billabong, swim in the billabong, become a tadpole-like creature before they can swim up inside their mother to be reborn. And so they said, our souls have to finish this journey. That's why you don't mention their name. You don't keep a photo. You don't want to call them back from their song journey before they've had a chance to reincarnate. So they had all these discussions. They went, yeah. We'll promise we won't build across this little bit of land. We'll just build on that side, or we'll build this side, and we'll leave this corridor. And they only wanted like 12 feet that they could go through and straight out to the point. But anyway, when they were building the factory, they crunched all the numbers and decided it was much more efficient just to build it across the song line, go against what they said. They didn't want money, they didn't want anything. They just wanted this, and opportunities for their people to work in with the mining company. And then they started having all sorts of financial problems, and then you get the mining company calling in the Kadacha, who supposedly don't exist anymore and are illegal, saying, hey, can you fix this for us? And the Kadacha was like, buddy, you broke it. You fix it. You know what has to be done. And they had to actually close that and move the factory because they were having a buildup of spirits. The machines were breaking down. The financials went crooked because they blocked the flow. They blocked this balance, and the Kadacha didn't curse them, but he wasn't going to fix it either. They had to shift the building and go back, and that cost them a lot more money than what it did originally.
So they do still exist.
So some of this reminds me of, you talking about the Gadaitcha, some of this reminds me of some Aboriginal Canadian stuff. Like, there's this really famous story of this Cree shaman named Jack Fiddler. And he operated as sort of a judge and a jury executioner. He was a shaman, but his specialty was in dealing with Wendigo. And Wendigo were people who succumbed to the spirit of cannibalism, were driven mad. And he would go and act as a jury and as a judge. And often the claim was, and this is a hereditary thing, his father had done it, his grandfather had done it. And the claim was that these people would ask to be euthanized, and he would go and execute these Wendigo. And he did this at one point and then is put on trial. And this is happening in like 1907, I want to say. And he winds up being executed, but they stop a lot of these shamans. There used to be this role for these shamans who would go around and would deal with this kind of extreme violence. And in the Cree society, these people who had committed these extreme acts of aggression would be called Wendigo. And then, the shaman would come and deal with them.
Wow.
I mean, and it's glorified in American culture as the FBI. The FBI have become the high priests of dealing with serial killers, right?
Right.
But in Indigenous culture, what happened if you had a rogue like that?
Right.
We had someone that dealt with them. They were those people, and they're still there performing functions. See, one of the things that got the Kadaitcha banned was that they interfered in politics. They were very good. They were employed by the SAS. Like I've got a friend whose father is Kadacha. He's just passed away, but he was employed by the SAS in Vietnam and Afghanistan as a tracker. And, they're very good at disappearing. They call them shapeshifters, but they can just blend into anything. And featherfoots, because they leave no tracks at all. They can follow any track, but leave no track. And he had very special skills. So he was employed. The SAS get psychic training. They get intuition training so that they know how to feel when there's danger around. But these people are a step beyond even the training they get. So, and he got no recognition when he came back. They actually put him in jail because they thought he was too dangerous to be in society. But with his skills, he just walked out. But then he had to stay on the run, and he couldn't be a good dad, and he couldn't be a functioning member of his society because he was always looking over his shoulder because they were coming for him. And this man has only just passed away last year. So he was still there. His son was supposed to be trained up, but he didn't get a chance to train his son up to do his things. But yeah, they were very much about. He was a tough guy. Like his son will tell you, he was a very tough guy. And it wasn't like the bone pointing has layers as well. I mean, they can point the bone at somebody, and the bone can be a warning. But if you point the bone and sing, the gates of what we would call Hades have opened up and is waiting for your soul, and you disappear in about two days to 2 weeks. But then sometimes they have in the museums people with bones that have been they put them in these sharp bones through the collarbone behind or the sternum into the heart, and they can leave them there. Or if they take it out, it leaves a little flap of skin, and they hardly bleed at all. So they would literally execute them if they needed to, as well.
And you were telling me too about how they create the other a couple days ago, or a couple episodes ago. You were discussing how they created those pointing bones, and you were saying that they would they bury them in human excrement, and
or human bodies sometimes, decaying bodies. Yeah.
So this is basically a lethal poison weapon.
Yeah, if they scratch you with it, you're gone. Yeah, I mean, these days it would be very sick and lots of very extreme antibiotics, get over it. But there's a level beyond that. Like I remember I was discovering my Indigenous side. A friend of mine was very excited, and he was a scientist. And we were doing lots of experiments at the time with gold and how gold takes down swelling. If you go into a Buddhist temple, they always have a gold bar. If somebody has an injury, they will strap it to your leg or strap it wherever the injury is to accelerate the injury recovery. So we were experimenting with this. And he was like, okay, so, I know you're sensitive, and I've got to take, and I have a terrible habit when I get in a car. If I'm not driving, I go to sleep. And so he drove me to this place, and I woke up. And as soon as I woke up, I knew I shouldn't be there. And I'm going, where am I? Where am I? And I didn't want to get out of the car. And he said, no, come out, get out. Tell me what you think. And he took me to a men's business spot, right? And women, there's places where women aren't supposed to go. There's places where men aren't supposed to go. And I got so sick. I've got the sickest I was ever in my life after that. And I didn't have any immediate friends around me who were Kadacha or shaman that I could call on quickly to help me. But I did have a friend who was a Hindu shaman who had given me a Hindu shaman initiation. So I rang her up, and she rang her uncle up. And I got another shaman friend of mine from one of the South American countries. I always get them all mixed up. And I said, please do some negotiation with me. It wasn't my fault. I was taken there. And they did. They started on their level negotiating with the spirits for me because I was too weak to do it myself. And they saved my life, So, but a lot of people don't realize in all of these dreaming stories, in all myth and legend, there is an and or an or. If you do this, this will happen, or you can do this and this will happen. Right? So there is always that option. And at the end of my book, the antagonist gets given the option. Right. but he's learnt through all these stories that there is an option, right? And he actually sees one of the previous stories, what happened when this other person didn't take option 2, option 1 still took him, So, yeah. So
Well,
this is what myth is to teach us, that we must
right.
take personal responsibility for ourselves. If we've done something wrong, we have to put it right. We have to do something to restore that balance.
Yeah, well, you got to find that balance. When I was telling you, I was reading that book by that
Mm,
anthropologist who was initiated, and he keeps
mhm,
talking about this. His name, I just want to double check the name here. Um, this man was initiated into a bunch of different Aboriginal men's groups. His name is David H. Turner, is what he
mhm,
was saying, and he keeps talking about this thing with Aboriginal philosophy as the grand design, and that there was this belief that there's this, these Kadaichas basically, and these other high level characters are connected to the
mm,
grand design, and they know how to put things back into balance, into order, and that's what they're doing, and that everything has to be in balance and order. And this was how
mhm,
they orientated their entire society. And so before
mhm,
the white people came, it was like really, really intense about following, like everything had a rhythm to it, everything had a pattern, everything had a way. And it was all about trying to find that way of least resistance, that harmony. And
mhm,
what he keeps talking about is how colonization shattered the grand design. And a lot of
mhm,
this caused a lot of these shaman characters, he said a couple of these elders to just break down because they
mhm,
couldn't understand how Westerners could shirk the great design and not see it, refuse to see it,
Yeah.
and
yeah,
actually crap on it,
mm,
in some way. And so there was a lot of real pain there, you know.
yeah. The indigenous word for white person is gubba, right? And
Mm,
it's a bit of an insult, but it basically means you silly bastard.
right.
So if you get called a gubba, it's not nice.
Right.
And it can refer to the color of your skin. Like a lot of dark-skinned Indigenous say to me, "Oh, you're very gubba, Shay," and I go, "But I'm not silly." Yeah. So yeah, but the sense of balance wasn't, it was just daily life. Like
Mhm.
you're taught to live the right way, so right
Right.
from when you're a kid. And one of the gubba things that they saw with the white people is that they couldn't live in the bush. They died like a young child in the bush. How could you not know how to survive in the bush? So it's simple things like that, like the bush.
Right.
out here
Right.
out here we brought heaps of food with us. We've hardly eaten any of it, right, because there's so much to eat here. So we've had a great time. We thought we'd lose a bit of weight. No, didn't happen. Because, there's so much here, and it was a bit of a silly thing for us to bring so much food with us when we knew we were going to go and catch and
What's
eat what
there?
was
You
here.
said there were crawdads in the
Mm.
creek. What
Yeah,
they what?
there's it's a great place for catching crayfish, and it's the yummiest meat. It's like sweet
So
lobster.
good.
It's beautiful.
Mm.
But there's also lots of fish here. Lots of fish here. So yeah. So we were very happy with what we had. We really only need a little bit of onion and a little bit of spices, and we were very happy.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm, yeah.
So tell us
So
more about your book. Yeah.
oh well. uh, See, the thing with the Kadaicha, the reason why I called it
Mm,
Kadaicha is because they politically interfered, they've become banned. And I really hope, my big hope is, especially if the broadcasting company takes this, that there may be a movement to lift this blanket ban on this part of the culture,
mm,
because it's becoming to the point where a lot of Indigenous people don't even believe in them anymore, and they're still there. They're still part of restoring the balance.
Mm.
And it's silly to ban something because a spiritual belief system, because it interferes in culture. You're better off banning the behavior that doesn't align with the new law system. So, you can be a Kadacha, just don't go and kill someone, you
Well,
know?
it makes me think of, like, one of my big things in religious studies, I was always looking at a lot of these different ways that different. So I was one of the big things I looked at early on was in the Caribbean and in South America, the
Mm,
difference between Catholic colonization and Protestant
mm,
colonization.
Mm.
And the
mm,
Protestants tended to try and wipe everything out, and they
Yeah.
failed
mhm,
anyway, you know, whereas the Catholics would allow an amalgamation.
Mm.
And there was, you know, you wind up it winds up creating these really interesting hybrid
mm,
cultures, right?
mhm,
So like, you know, like for example, one of the ones that I'm just super interested in, that I find just so wild, is Kindamba in Brazil, which is a form of black magic, but it's become sort of like incorporated into modern society. They got temples, but they're also doing blood sacrifices. They're, you know,
mm,
sacrificing birds. They're doing all this traditional, and part of it is traditional indigenous, part of it is African,
mm.
and then part of it is modern occult. And it's like,
Mhm.
it's hard, you can't separate them. You
No,
know,
no, you
you
can't.
can't figure out where what's coming from with. And talking with you, Leslie, this was very similar to you talking about a lot of your Voodoo tradition is very similar in
Mm,
that regard.
mm,
Yeah, anytime you're dealing with an inclusive society,
mm.
it's not
Right.
Yeah.
important then to separate it out, you know.
Mm.
Right, right, right. And you just kind of, everything gets amalgamated in. So it's really
Yeah, and
interesting how some of these indigenous cultures do that too, right?
yeah. Well, and the Australian Indigenous is very inclusive, right? Like you speak to the elders, it's never about an us and them thing. It's I remember my first husband and I, when I was going to university in Lismore, we got bailed up on the street by a group of radical, militant young black people on the street there, and because I mean, my husband, he was a quarter Indigenous, so he looked very Indigenous, and they still bailed us up, and they didn't know that we had Indigenous blood, and they were just like, white people should get out of the country. We were running a music store in town at the time, and they were complaining about "Wake Me Up Before You Go Go." They're going, "What is that? It's got music that has no message in it at all. Doesn't hit you here." And we just agreed with them. Absolutely terrible song. It's got soulless. And we started finding this common ground about music.
Oh,
And
that's
their
great.
elder, right, who was a lecturer at the uni, he raced over. He must have seen what the kids were doing and realized that we could get beaten up. And he ran over and was like, hey, this is not what I meant. They must have just got out of a meeting. And he said, mate, don't you understand? It's not that we're going to kick them out of the country. We're going to breed them out. Right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anybody that is in Australia for more than two generations has got some Indigenous in their background somewhere.
Mm, mm,
It's not
Mhm.
really an us and them. And if you are a recent immigrant and you marry somebody who is, more than two generations in Australia, now your family has, Indigenous in you as well. But this wonderful belief of the Indigenous is like, if you kill somebody and it's out of balance, the way that nature restores the balance is the soul of that child is born back to you or in your family. And because it's ended in a bad way in this life, then that child will come and cause trouble in your family until you sort it out. Right. But of course, you're not going to want to kill your child. They'll just really upset your family until you find a way of restoring the balance with that child. Right. So there's a very big belief that white souls are born into black families and black souls are born into white families, right? And that we are going to merge, that we are all joined, that there isn't separate culture, that that I mean, you listen to an Aussie, and I can't hear my nasalness, but I'm sure you can hear I sound nasally, a bit nasally when I'm talking to you. That's the Indigenous thing, and every Australian has got that way we speak from the
Mhm.
Indigenous culture here,
right.
right? You speak to and they sing nasally. It's all about the resonance in the face, and we've inherited that. That's become part of the wider culture. It's very identifying as Australian, and we owe that to our Indigenous people. I think our very down to earth attitude, the way that we cope with everything, we get that from our Indigenous souls that we have assimilated and that we love and live with on a daily basis, whether they're still a living black person or a black person that's been reincarnated into our family. We're not going to get rid of that. and the more we
So
live here and the
it's
more.
very much about reincarnation, the
Oh, God,
religion of
yeah. Oh,
spirituality.
absolutely. The soul, all life.
Almost like the
It's,
Korean, where it's mentioned in every aspect of
I
the.
love, I love the letter that Einstein wrote to, because Einstein hated religion, but he was also what we call in Australia a mad shagger. He had quite a few affairs, and he was very charming with the wives of his colleagues as they passed away. But he wrote this letter to one of his colleagues' wives, and in that he said, "Don't grieve." He said, "Just as you can't destroy energy, the energy of that man can't be destroyed." Yeah. So, you know, it is that energy's going to go somewhere. It's got to go somewhere. And there's this real indigenous recognition of, yeah, if that
Well,
energy finishes like
there
that, it's going to.
there there is that in specifically in Michoacan, an old man laid it down for me about how we don't go up. That's a hell realm that you
Mm,
created up there, and you can't live. You have to go down and merge with the mother, and then you'll come back up like the plants do.
mm, mm,
But this is very specific system in which the soul
mm.
is reincarnated in a specific family. This is not
Yeah.
just a vegetative metaphor.
No, no, no. The same psychic peer group, I like to call it. So they'll come back in
Um,
the same mob. They don't like to use the word tribe in Australia. So the same mob, because
uh,
it takes a village. Well, in Australia, it takes a mob. So
okay.
it'll come back within that same group. So they all, the people that broke it have to fix it, you know? And you wonder why, especially after all our world wars, why there's so much conflict between children and adults, that didn't exist there pre-World War. There was more harmony, more respect. Now there's not the respect and more disharmony because they've got to sort it out and they don't realize how they've got to sort it out and where they've got to restore that balance. So,
Well, I always remember, reading Cicero and he's yelling, the kids these days, they don't read, they dress funny, and they don't respect the gods. And
mhm,
if it was true for Cicero, it's true, like there's always been to a certain degree,
mm,
but yeah, we have this disconnect with
mm, mm,
family in general. And
mm,
and everything's
Well,
become
yeah, you
divided
guys were
around
like,
any kind of
your
identity.
mom was Dianic. What did you have to rebel against? And it's like, well, it was my mom. I had everything to
yeah.
do.
Oh,
Right.
both my sons are very, very corporate. They were
Sons
with,
are nice to their moms, though.
oh yes, my boys are beautiful, very respectful, but they've gone very, very corporate. One works in teenage mental health, heads that up for Queensland. The other one was high up in Boeing, Fortune 500 company. So
There
yeah.
you go.
So, and they've been raised with all of this. They've been raised in the bush. They've been raised, not in communes and extreme alternative hippiness, but just all of this down
Alternative
to earth stuff.
spirituality.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, mhm,
No,
yeah,
that's beautiful though. It just shows you that they've been free to live their own lives and make their own
Yeah,
paths, right?
yeah.
yeah. But the
And I'm
child
sure
will
they
always
still
go.
respect everything that you gave them, right?
The alternative path to how they've raised, if they've been raised
Yeah.
alternatively.
People always rebel against their parents, it's just like my
Mm,
parents were both like super atheist, and then I found myself as a teen getting into Christianity and then
mm,
rebelling against that because it was crazy.
mm,
But
mm, mm.
this is the thing. We always
Yeah.
wind up, I feel it's an important thing. I think it's somewhat in youth to try and explore the
Mm,
opposite
mm,
of what your parents thought was right. It forces us to also practice just empathy and exploration in general. It's so important to travel and to learn about different cultures and to try to assimilate within a different culture. It forces
mm.
you to be really aware and to be a lot more respectful, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but that's
It's
such a
that
luxury at the same time. Most people can't travel, but if you
yeah.
can, it's really important.
Oh, yeah, and even the ones, and I think travel is more like, uh, you go back hundreds of years ago, and Shanks's pony. Getting around by foot was the only way of traveling. So you can
Mm,
travel if you want to. You can get there.
right.
There's always a way.
Mhm.
But but this cultural appropriation or cultural is it appropriation or is it respect and assimilation thing has come up here again in Australia. Our
Mm.
newest billionaire is Margot Robbie. Margot Robbie is our
Oh
newest
my God.
billionaire.
Oh, she's a
Yeah,
billionaire? Oh, wow.
yeah,
Good for her.
yeah. She between Barbie and Wuthering Heights, she's a billionaire now. And she
Mm.
used to go to school with my son and his friend, the one that's in Boeing, and his friend. She was a computer geek. She loved it. You know,
Uh,
she had dark hair and she used to speak like what? And so, it's different to the teenager that I knew. But and because she was in Tallabudgera Valley and we had our big Shambhala, the 168 acres was in Tallabudgera Valley. So, and all the kids there knew each other. They just all knew each other. Yeah. So, it's like, good on you, girl. But she turned up for one of the premieres and she had a heart shaped diamond that was from India. Right.
Mm.
And everybody's going, oh, cultural appropriation, that should be returned to India. That's a national treasure. And they don't know whether or not the Shah that had it sold it or if it was taken during the English invasion of India. They don't know. There is no record of that. They don't know whether it was sold but they're just going, oh, she's appropriating culture by wearing a diamond necklace. It's like, you know, um,
The
but by the
cultural
same
appropriation
token,
thing is heavy, right? It's such a
yeah,
hard thing. I
it
mean, and
is.
the
Where's the
media wants to,
line?
yeah, no,
Yeah.
it is, I agree with you, right? Because it is something that it gets weaponized in the same way
Mm,
that identity gets weaponized. And you see this a lot in modern politics, especially in Canada and the US. And a lot
mm,
of this is born out of legitimate issue, like the
mm,
reality here is like 90% of Indigenous religion here in Canada is closed. I'm talking to
mm.
you about stuff that happened in 1907 because that's what I can get access to,
Well,
you
yeah,
know?
but she was just saying they just finished dismantling an ancient stone circle. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
the
Mm.
violence is still happening.
Exactly. Exactly.
I
It
would
also
rather have
happened
seen that
during
appropriated and turned into a tourist site than pulled apart.
Yeah, right.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
No, that's true. It would be better to, I mean, it's just saying it's in what we've seen here though, it's like there's this weird politicization of it. On one, like I understand what we want to see. Like I think it's really important that we have cultural exchange. And there
Mm,
is a way to do fair cultural exchange. Like we have things to offer others and they have things to offer us,
mm,
and there's a way to do things in respect, and like I can be inspired by you and create something distinct. The issue
mm.
is when I claim your thing as mine and I don't acknowledge the inspiration. But if
Well,
you're
I
acknowledging
You can
understand that
have
inspiration,
in
my hat.
Australia there's laws about the art. You
right?
can't,
Yeah.
like a white person can't make money selling Aboriginal designs, and I think
Mm,
that's really important, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
it's funny. It's really funny here. I mean, and this is what the book is about. We've got to it is about stop this black and white culture. We are Australians.
Mm.
Right.
And by banning part, whatever you suppress is going to bounce back. And I don't think our government realizes how much imbalance they are creating, right? That Kardashians are still trying to fix by suppression, right? So they've got to stop suppressing it. They 100%, you're not allowed to make money by selling Indigenous art. But by the same
Mm.
token, the Indigenous flag that they use here in Australia, which is like the red land, the black, and then they've got the red rock in the middle, yeah, the yellow, black, and red flag. That's actually owned by a white person, and every time you use it, you've got to pay him royalties. So,
No.
so how can they make that
These
law
things
over
come for
there?
reasons, right?
Yeah,
These things come for reason. It's like
yeah,
I understand people's rage, but it's like oftentimes the rage is so misplaced. It's like why
I know.
we always get mad at like celebrities, or we get mad
Yeah.
at children on TikTok, usually young
Mm,
women, and it's just
mm,
like, come on, your Halloween yeah, get mad at the company selling the Halloween costume. Have a
mm.
conversation with the girl. Don't yell in the girl's face. She's a girl. Like, come on, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I'm sure she's just having a good time, and if there is some racist stuff there, you can unpack it, but unpack
Mm,
it,
mm,
like I think like a lot of this has gotten so, and I mean, a lot of it
ridiculous.
is just pumped up by the
Yeah,
internet and made up. It's
yeah,
made up
it
and
is.
manufactured. It's not real, but people get
Yeah, for
isolated into
likes.
their little
Yeah,
cohorts, you know?
yeah. Let
And it's
me
like,
create conflict so I can get some likes. Hmm.
well, you get those
Yeah,
people who virtue signal, and then you get those
mm,
people who vice signal. It's like,
hmm,
so that one person is going to say that's cultural appropriation, and then the other person is going to go, F you, I'm going to wear it. And
mm,
this is what the internet has become. And it's,
yeah.
and this is the issue that is aggravating all of this
Yeah,
cultural appropriation
we
nonsense
can't
to
tiptoe
fuel
around that. We can't
ads.
tiptoe around that. We just can't. We've got to just get on with the business of living. We do.
Yeah.
Like like rather than ban people from selling Aboriginal art and making money for it, how about we sell it as long as we make the rule that the artist is honoured and gets a royalty. Oh, we do have that, so let's enforce that. All right. So, and the flag, well, if you want to use the flag that some white guy designed, you're appropriating his culture and maybe you should pay the royalties for that. But, let's just get on with the most important issues here. Um, Small conflicts stop us being united on big problems, right? And I believe that's why so many small conflicts are getting stirred up. The big issues here are we do have to be united. We have a race that is doing crazy things, like, we had the Bondi shootings here in Australia. That was just so sad. Whether it was instigated by Mossad, whether it was instigated by Palestine, it shouldn't be happening. We're focusing on the differences rather than the similarities. They both love the same bit of land over there. Okay, so let's give it to God. And if either of you play up, you can leave. You know, if you love
But
the
it
land and
was
it's so
no.
holy, show us your behavior is reflecting that. We've all got to get on together here rather than carrying on a genocide that's two-way, that's been going on for at least 4,000 years. Give it up, guys. It's an old song now. Let's just get on with the business of living. Let's restore that balance.
I mean, that one is way too, yeah, that is that
Yeah.
is that is that is not two sides. That is one side. And that is one of the
Mm.
most extreme, intense things that's happening in this moment. And
Yes, I know.
And
free the
it's
Palestinian
generated.
people and
But
end the
yeah,
genocide.
It
We have
doesn't
to
I
say
know.
that.
start with the people, and so that it's hard to like it's me thinking I can make a change by recycling my plastic bags. These are decisions that are made at a much
Yeah.
higher level. I'm not gonna
Mm,
have any impact there. You know what I mean?
mm, mm,
And this there is it's not about
mm.
people getting along.
Yeah.
Also in the States, it's complex, see, because for example, I just left Mexico because I felt like things were about to blow up.
Mm,
And
mm, mm,
today things
mm,
blew up. But
mm,
see, it's
mm,
this
mm,
whole toggle work where it's a tension between the Mexican government and Trump.
mm, mm,
Mexico just sent aid to Cuba.
mm,
Right.
uh, there's a Holocaust going on in the United States. They have incinerators, and it's
Right.
mm,
mostly Mexicans. It's anyone brown, but it's mostly they're targeting Mexicans on
yeah.
whom they are dependent for food,
Right.
housing, and childcare.
Yeah.
The
It's gotten
wall
this
And
has
insane.
always been to keep you in, right? But now what happened? The cartels united because now they have to defend their people against this kidnapping, right? And then the Mexican government caved to pressure on Trump. The cartels took out a nice guy. And
mm,
so the Mexican government took out a cartel leader. So
mm,
now you have the Mexican government and the cartels at war because of decisions
mm,
that are made at a much higher level,
mm, mm,
and they should be uniting against, right, but but then instead
mm,
shooting each other. And so the good thing is the cartels don't shoot civilians. There's going to be no
mm.
civilian deaths. There will be no Mexican businesses harmed. But the airport is on fire, and
I
Walmart's
know.
on fire,
I know.
and so it's
Yeah.
really
I'm
complicated, right?
terrified. Like, yeah,
Mexico doesn't need gringos.
and
Gringos
they're
need
like, well, the
Mexico.
flotilla is about to hit Cuba. They're sending a medical flotilla, and the question is, what is the Americans going to do? Are they going to
Yeah.
Exactly.
blow it out of the water? They've been blowing
Yeah.
out hundreds of fishermen.
And
It's anyway,
so
but like, yeah,
that's the
Yeah.
thing about uniting. It's like
Mm,
also in the family, domestic violence is generated,
mm,
right? Because
mm.
really, if we know where to point our guns, it's not going to be at each other if we're really
yeah,
thinking. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
and and and
Oh,
there are battles on other levels that we can
yeah, that's
focus
right.
on.
And I think this is what the Indigenous have to teach us in Australia is they're very
Yeah,
much about let's just get on with it, guys.
yeah,
And with situations like this, there's a whole lot of little fishy out there that are way
mm,
bigger than the big fishy. And
yeah.
all we got to do is just say no. No is
Yeah,
such a magical word rather than
mm,
focusing on all these other little conflicts, and
mm,
these conflicts between nations. I mean, going back to the Israeli Palestinian thing, I mean, the Bible is about genocide. The whole
yeah,
Old Testament is about the genocide of the
I
Palestinians.
say, yeah,
yeah,
It's been there for so long. All we have to do is say no,
yeah.
no, we're not going to do that. We're not, no, no more. Right? And if everybody says that, there's not much else that can be done by either of these groups. And I do say either because I'm old enough to remember the PLO blowing planes out of the sky and things like that. So neither of them are innocent. But when they do stuff like that, they're going to create a reprisal, right? And guys, they've just got to stop it. They've got to stop it. Both sides. It's just a no.
I don't
In
see how you
Australia.
stop this now, right? Like, this is the problem is that you get religion involved, right?
Mm,
And this is why you're able to commit a genocide. And
mhm,
this is why it's like now it's always tit for tat traumas in the
mm,
family. You've created millions and millions of diaspora who have seen the worst trauma humanly imaginable. What's going to
right.
come from this, right?
we
And
know
then you
Soldiers,
what we
have a
know
if
what's
we
coming.
have
victimization
situations
culture.
in history, where the soldiers have just refused to fight. And if the soldiers refuse to fight, it doesn't matter what the big guys up the top say. If they just go, no, we're not doing this. All right. We refuse to fight. All right.
But this
Just,
is
well,
the
sorry,
thing.
we're going home.
No, there's no place for these people to go. There is no home on one side.
Mm,
And then on the
mhm,
other side, they're flying in tourists to come do freaking, flying in basically people from all around the world to go on their little Israeli family
This
reunion
happened in
to
Bosnia
go
as
kill
well.
people,
This
right?
mhm,
happened in
mm,
Bosnia as well, where
yeah.
people would come to as if it's a safari.
Yeah,
Mhm.
this is what it
Yeah, but
is.
imagine if the Israeli army just went, no, we're not going to do this anymore. If the
Yeah,
PLO and just went, no. It honestly, that's the only solution is that people have to say no, right?
Mm,
We just got to say no. But otherwise, it's going to keep getting crazy if we let the cousins at the top, and they're all related to one another up there,
mm,
right? Just argue
mm.
out their family disputes using us as the pawns, right?
mm.
Because if the soldiers all get killed, they're going to come after the general public. And what will you say? They're going to try and enlist, they've had conscription before, right? And you just have to say no. We're not going to go and fight your silly land war in Asia. We're not going to fight your silly war over here. No, no, we're not doing it.
But
Uh,
this is the thing. We'll see what happens. It looks like Trump is about to go to war in Iran as well. They have
mm,
60% of the entire armed forces all scattered there, waiting,
mm.
and
Remember
that will
in,
be a global catastrophe. That'll be a
yeah,
global
well,
catastrophe.
Well, yeah, and there's a lot of other stronger armies that are just waiting for them to expire. You know, if they use up all their strength on these minor conflicts, they will have nothing to defend their homeland from a lot stronger armies.
America's so, they don't have any issues about their homeland. What they won't be able to maintain their hegemony. They won't be able to extend themselves. And the world is turning. What we're seeing, it's sad. It's sad. It's that you're seeing the world turn on America. Like, and this is something that hits home for me because like I live on the border. I can see America right from my doorstep. I used to
Oh,
travel there.
America needs to turn on
Yeah.
America the way the world
America
has
needs,
turned on
yeah,
America.
yeah,
Everybody
Yeah.
needs to say
yeah.
no, just like
No.
Europe just said no to America.
Yeah.
They said
Yeah.
no, and they're cutting them off in every single way. And
Yeah.
you have to. That's the
Yeah.
only way. The elephants do it. When there's a young elephant out of control, the older male
Mm,
elephants will corral the fucker and move him
yeah.
out.
We have a good question here. So I don't know if it begins and ends with the Pleiades, but they have one of the oldest documented versions of the Pleiades
Yes,
story
that's
because of
right.
archaeological evidence. So they have these really interesting paintings in ochre
Mhm.
that they claim that archaeologists say are about between 30,000 and 70,000 years old. And if this is true, this says it's by far the oldest version of the Pleiades myth. And what we need, the
Mm,
Pleiades, what's so important about that star cluster is that the sixth star in the cluster disappears. This, for example, in the Greek becomes a whole magical thing. You have the goddess Asterope who descends to earth and has relations with Aries. Sometimes it's Mariope, but you see this in so
mm,
many different cultures. It's such an important thing. But the indigenous were aware of the disappearing star
yeah.
70,000 years ago, potentially. So this puts it
Oh, yeah.
way earlier than everyone, you know?
Oh, there's definitely a big indigenous Pleiadian culture, the dreaming culture. And it goes, it's one of these, because not all dreaming is applicable in all areas. Some of it's very local. Like on the Gold Coast here, we have a white dolphin dreaming, which is about hunting with the dolphins. Obviously, the Pitjantjatjara in the centre of Australia are going to mean nothing to them. But we nearly all of us do have a Pleiadian dreaming where the seven sisters come down and they travel across, giving culture to people across the land. And there's actually you can get maps of the Pleiadian dreaming where they go from one mob to the next mob across Australia. They start in the east because it rises in the east and it sets in the west. So they actually go from the east to the west across Australia, making giving law and culture to people. Yeah,
Oh, that's
as they go.
beautiful.
They lots and lots of different little stories about how they dance, and this one digs, and this one there's an old man that chases six of the seven sisters, and the other sister has to like go in if he catches them and let them free at night. And they play tricks on this whole. But they are being chased by an old man, and I believe there is. Oh, what's the name of the star that chases the Pleiades through in the sky? There is a star that chases the Pleiades.
Orion.
Yeah, yeah. So there, but it's Orion's the whole constellation. But there
Yeah.
is, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't remember what the actual which specific star, but
Yeah, so there is this old man star that chases them as well. Never quite catches up to them, but there's some funny shenanigans about how he catches them and then they get out of it, and
mhm.
But on the way, they're getting help from everybody, and they're giving culture to everybody as they go. So yeah, so start and a lot of Indigenous people will say law and culture is star culture. So there is this real connection with the stars. There's different constellations they have down here. Like I don't think you can see the Southern Cross from Canada, but in Australia, the Southern Cross is the head of the big emu. So we have different animals in the sky, but they very much. I mean, you walk around under these big planes, looking up at the stars at night. Of course, you're going to have star culture as well.
Oh yeah.
Um,
It's one of these things where it's so wild because it's hard to notice that disappearing star. And there's a lot of
mm,
speculation about how you could actually even see it and where you can see it on certain parts of the globe. So
mm,
to see them being able
yeah,
to document that is extraordinary because it's not just
mm,
a star culture, it's in a very advanced star culture, more advanced than
mm-hmm,
most Westerners would give, an
mm-hmm,
Aboriginal culture, which is
mm-hmm.
unfortunate. but it's,
Yeah.
it is what it is. But they clearly have a very advanced understanding of the astrology, you know,
Yeah. Astronomy. Yeah.
astronomy. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Um, they do have beings that appear, and
Mhm.
some Indigenous people say, "Oh, they come from the stars," but I think they're very influenced by UFO culture. But
Mm.
the creators and the educators do seem to come out of another dimension. And I think the dreaming also is about that other dimension that you go in, because the Yowie, our monsters and spirits that are in the bush, they quite openly say they're not from this world. They're from the world adjacent to this world. And we
Uh-huh.
can't see that world. And it comes in and out of this world. Some people even say the Yowie is the true form of the Kadaitcha spirit because they get scared by it. Or it's the guardian of the Kadaitcha or the messenger of the Kadaitcha. But it comes out of another world, out of another dimension into this one, and then disappears back into it. And there are, in culture,
Interesting.
there are certain spots that are portals, certain billabongs that are portals into these other dimensions. So
Hmm.
billabong is like when you have a river and it opens up into a big circular area. Yeah, but a
Okay.
billabong can also mean a big bay as well. But
That's so interesting because I was telling you before, near me, there's the most famous sacred site near me is the Agawa
mhm,
Canyon pictographs, and I showed you that the underwater panther or the underwater
mhm,
lynx, they call it.
mhm,
It's like a
mhm,
dragon with horns. Well, that spot is a bay, and it's a place
mhm,
where they would go to travel to the underworld, where they would go
mhm,
meditate on the
mhm,
on when the tide was low.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it's also one of these sites that's just been overrun with tourists, and it's depressing as hell because the government doesn't even, well, it's gotten
Oh
so
no.
bad now
I
that
know, I'm laughing because I'm like
yeah.
dealing with that
Oh,
myself.
I know. I don't take it any, I take it for what it is. It's just like,
Mm,
what they've done there now is because of COVID, they got rid of the guide. So
mm,
it's a tricky place to go. You got to walk along a rope, and it's on the edge of a cliff. And if the tide is
mm,
too high, it will sweep you. So no
mm,
one should be going there without a guide. And
Right.
yet
mhm.
they last time I was there, it was just open, and people are
Mhm.
putting their hands over these pictographs, these 30,000-year-old, and it's like your palm oil will
Oh,
destroy this. And the indigenous
oh,
are freaking out, and they've been lobbying the government, and there's even graffiti from them there because they
oh,
still use it as a sacred site, but no
uh,
one's listening. And it's like
yeah.
Dude, I was in
We
the
ridiculous.
can understand.
museum in Delphi, and
Mm,
Hmm.
and the guide had to come over and yell at someone who had climbed up onto, like, for some reason this one piece wasn't behind glass like the other ones were. It was a big copper cauldron on a tripod,
mm,
ancient. You can see through parts of it. And this woman got up there and started banging on it like it was a steel drum. And she had to come over and yell at it. It was unbelievable. I was like,
Mm,
you have no sense
mm.
at all, you know?
Yeah, you can understand why in Australia some of the Indigenous people don't want to share where their sacred sites are. Not yet.
Right?
Not
right,
yet.
right.
Yeah,
But
not.
that's the energy of appropriation. When it's
Mm,
appropriation, is that they're just trying to take from it,
Yeah,
yeah.
energetically.
yeah.
And
Yeah, we had a Anglican priest in Victoria, and he was going around to a lot of the mobs there, saying he was doing anthropological research, and he found out about a lot of the sacred sites. And sometimes it'll be a sacred site will be a tree that's been there a very long time. And anyway, but he went around to these rocks and these trees and these places and these birthing sites with a big can of Dulux paint, put a big cross on them.
Oh my
Right.
gosh.
And white in Indigenous culture is the color of death, right? So
Mm.
wow.
that's why you blanch when you're dying. Even a dark
Oh,
person will go really
Christians.
weird shade of grey.
Because it's the
So it
same in
completely
those
desecrated their sites. You
in
know.
those
Mm.
proto-Etruscan temples that I was telling you
Mm,
about. It's the same thing. And you'll find crosses that you can date from 1400s, 1500s,
mm.
1600s to last
Yeah. Well,
week, you know.
this is only like 1990s. So he went around with his big Dulux can.
Oh,
So. Yeah.
Well, and this is
So
the thing is that like what we see too, it's interesting is that now we're starting to see it come back, but like I remember reading, like when I first went to university, I was doing a double
Mhm.
major, religion and anthropology. So I took these indigenous anthropology courses and I was so excited. I'm like, I'm going to learn about this. And then you're confronted with the wall. They
Mhm.
went up there and they have all
Mhm.
been anglicized. And
Mhm.
now they hate themselves and they attack anyone who speaks out about their own religious stuff. And that was true. But it's now starting to finally change among a lot of these
Mhm.
indigenous communities, and
Yeah.
and it's also
Well,
not
it's
as bad
internalized
as my
oppression for you.
classes.
I mean, the
Yeah,
Irish went through it. They almost lost their language.
yeah,
Mhm.
Sicilians almost lost their language. And
Mhm.
yeah.
and that's what I'm
Mhm.
hoping, because you're saying that now
Mhm.
there's the generation, there's the gap in Australian Aboriginal
Well,
spirituality. And I'm hoping there's a
there's
young people coming in to fill it.
Well, this is very interesting. I was going to mention this before because language, and I know you guys love language here, is a real evolving thing in Australia. This is very much reflects the culture because there's a few things. This is, pardon what this answer might be long because it's multifaceted. We were talking before about the 20,000-year-old things. Well, they've found things here in Australia of early settlement that goes back 60,000 years. Predates the out of Africa theory. If you want to look up the Mungo man, the Mungo woman. So, but they found these bones and like evidence of them lighting fire way, way, way back, maybe 120,000 years old. And
Mm.
in universities, they try and say this is a continuous culture. Now, there's a real pushback with the Indigenous in Australia going, we are so inclusive, our language has evolved. If you have a person, because we were saying before about the song lines, we don't want to call them back from the song lines when they're on their journey. So we don't speak their name anymore. So if you have a person that's named after a lyrebird or kangaroo, right, that word for kangaroo will change in that language forever from the death of that person. So we have to come up with a new word for kangaroo. So these dictionaries that we have are a snapshot of the language at that period of time. But by making these dictionaries in that attempt, we're actually killing the language because it was an evolving, constantly evolving language, which shows it's a constantly evolving culture. And we can see things like in Australia, we have archaeological finds of Vikings in the north of Australia. We have Egyptian hieroglyphs outside of Gosford. We can see that the Indigenous here
There's a
sent you.
symbol on an
Mhm.
Aboriginal temple that's on Gobekli Tepe also.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Series of symbols.
yeah. So there's this. It's a very unique gene, and we can actually see this indigenous gene in South America, in Asia, and in Egypt, where they've gone over and sent the eucalyptus for the embalming process for making mummies. Can't make a mummy without eucalyptus oil. Where do you get eucalyptus oil? All right. So we know that they had trade. We've got evidence of that here. So this was a culture that had connections with other cultures. It wasn't isolated from the rest of the world. The flora and the flora was, but even the dingoes, we know the dingoes came from Asia, even though they're considered our native dog. We know
Oh,
they came from Asia maybe 1,000 years ago.
oh
We
wow.
know that there is a very strong Tamil gene. So Tamil Indians, if you get some of the Northern Australian Indian Indigenous people and put them between pictures of their Tamil children, they're
So
identical.
Yeah, Tamil
Uh,
people are very black too, and
yeah,
yeah, and they have very similar kind of features, but they also
yeah,
share a lot of Indian features, though. But I
yeah.
always
Well,
thought that was
they've
interesting,
yeah
you
they've
know.
done studies on 160 mobs and found Tamil genes in them. So we know that there was a Tamil invasion 2,000 years ago. But
Yeah, and then
our
there's
wow.
all the
universities
Tamil
don't.
literature. Sorry, there's all this Tamil literature about all of these empires and these islands. Like this is
Mm.
where a lot of like that modern New Age
Mm,
theory of Lemuria has
mm,
really
Oh
taken
wow.
root. Has
mm,
really
mhm,
taken, Blavatsky's nonsense has taken root
mm,
now in India
mhm,
because in a lot
Right.
of these,
Because of the Hindu nationalists and the
yeah,
Theosophical Society. Yeah.
exactly,
yeah.
because of the Hindu nationalists and because of, the British, they went into the South Indian areas and they
Mm,
said, you guys aren't actually from there, you're actually from the islands. This is the thing. So one of the things that the British do is, I saw this time and time again. One of the way they
Mm,
justify stealing people's land is they claim that you're not from there. They claim that you're
mm,
from somewhere else. So like in America, they told all the indigenous people here that they were actually Jewish, that they were the lost
mm,
tribe of Israel, and they had no right to this land, and therefore we could steal
mm,
it, you know?
mm,
And this winds up becoming Mormon nonsense
mm,
later on, but it
mm,
was
mhm.
weaponized mythology to
Yeah.
dis people. And you see this
Well,
throughout. You see this throughout. You know, in India, one of the ways they did that was they said that the Tamils weren't actually entitled to South India. They're
mm,
actually from the islands. And they used their own mythology to justify this. And then they said that, you know,
mm,
Lemuria, that made up continent that scientists made up to justify, because the original Lemuria was a pseudo theory when people didn't understand tectonic plates to try
mm,
and explain why you have lemurs in Madagascar and lemurs in India, like similar species of monkey, the black faced monkey,
Mm.
right?
mhm,
And so they said there had to be a land chain. But now we
mhm,
know that it was tectonic plates.
mm,
So there was, and there's no proof of ever being a massive island there.
mm,
So Lemuria doesn't exist. Now,
mm,
maybe the Tamils came from Australia. Maybe they came from Indonesia, but that's not what the Hindu nationalists are saying. They're
Right,
saying that they
right.
came, you know, and the British were using this as a way to steal Tamil
mm,
Nadu and to try to force them into Sri Lanka,
mm.
right? And
Yeah.
they did the same thing in the north with other stories, you know?
Sri Lanka's
Mm.
the Ireland
But
of Asia. They've been
yeah,
fighting for
Oh
300
yeah.
years.
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
And but the Indigenous in Australia are going, they're lying about our culture. You know, we've got to tell
Right.
the truth about our culture. And our culture is very multicultural. You know,
Mm,
we have the Tamil genes here, we have some Viking genes, we have all these weird genes here, but we do have the M6 gene, which is the typical Indigenous gene. So there's definitely a
Mm,
pool of people that have had, like the whites weren't the first wave of invaders here. It wasn't isolated
mm,
completely before that. That suits their narrative. Nobody came here before the British. Rubbish. We
right.
did. We had international trade before the British. You know, they had autonomy here. So it suits that British narrative and they hang on to it. Now, what also suits the narrative is that there was no written language. They were Stone Age people. And in
Mm,
my book, I make a big thing because they had a message stick. There was like originally, there was like 436, they estimate, different nations here in Australia. So if you imagine, it's like Europe. We've got European people, but they're all different nations. You can broadly call them European. So we can broadly call these Aboriginal because, but they had a different language, they have different culture, they look different to each other, they live in different areas of Australia, they knew about each other. But the one thing that they did have that was unique in the whole world, they had a unified written language.
mm.
So you
mm,
imagine Europe, if you could send a letter in Spain and the English people could read it without, you know, because you have
right.
one written language.
Wow.
Now, this has become one of the things where the message sticks, you know, because they would write it on a stick, and this message stick was like sending a letter. Hey, we're going to have a corroboree. So and so's getting married. Make sure you bring plenty of shellfish and we'll trade. Yeah, and this is what these message sticks are about. They're about very mundane. Oh, sit in the sun so it doesn't reflect in the camera. They're about very mundane things and sometimes about very spiritual things. But it's a language of symbols. It's a pictographic language, but it's universal.
Mm,
That's
And they've
beautiful.
taken them out of the universities because going, oh no, they're secret business. You can't have those. You got it. And what's
Mm,
happening is people are forgetting that they even existed.
mm.
And this
mm,
is so important for the unification of the people, all the different peoples here, as they
Mm,
accept that they have one written language that
mm.
exists nowhere else in a place this
Yeah,
size,
I've
right?
never
Amongst so many
heard
I
different
that
wasn't
people.
even
before.
aware that you guys like that the indigenous had a written language. Like it makes perfect sense because most cultures do have some kind of
How could
communication,
Exactly
they
my
have had
you
point.
trade
know?
like that without one? Yeah.
Right, right, right.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know?
And these pictographs, you know, the more they look at them, the more they're looking at, you know, now that they are understanding that the cave paintings in France are a message. You know, the bison come through here with their children at this time of year. They've actually interpreted those cave paintings and they realize they're not just art, it's a message for the next person that stays there.
Well, and they're also reinterpreting what were called stylistic. markings as language now.
And
Yeah.
some of those in France line up with some of the pictographs here in Australia.
And
So we're starting.
we have such a limited understanding of language in our
Yeah.
modern time because we've been so influenced by alphabetical systems. But
Yeah.
like one of the things when you study a lot of the Greek stuff, like the Greeks are obsessed with the Scythians. The Scythians got all the magic, right? Well, the Scythians, they don't use a written language. They don't use a hieroglyphic language. They use dioramas. They literally construct dioramas, and they would put things, and the placement within a diorama would mean something, and then they would send it to you. So like there's a famous one where they have these dead rats and these arrows
Seriously, they had a
coming on them.
dollhouse instead of a
They
book?
they
That is
sent them
wild.
they sent them a box with a bunch of dead rats and arrows coming at the rats and a river, and they were like, if you try to cross, basically the message was, you try to cross the river, we're going to kill you and drown you like dead
You're
rats.
going to be a dead rat.
Yeah. But apparently this was a very, very advanced language system, and some of it still survives in their burial sites because they would carve the various shapes. Like a spade would mean something and you'd put it in a specific angle. A ladder would mean something, you'd put it at a specific angle. Like to us that wouldn't be language, but to them this was language. Or I think about ancient Peru, they had a whole language by knots in rope. So when the first conquistadors went there, they were burning all this stuff or throwing it away, that all of this tapestry, think it was women's nonsense, and it was their entire literature.
They knew.
They
knew. And this is what's happening in the university. Yeah, this is what's happening in the universities at the moment as well, is they're going, oh, no, this is secret culture. You better take that away. And they're giving it to the oldest aunties who'll put it away somewhere and it'll be lost forever, rather than it being catalogued, studied, looked at. If we, more important than spoken language that used to change all the time is a written language that didn't. So, it will unify. There's like 200 different mobs left here in Australia. It will unify us all if we can bring this written language back, right? And get that dictionarized and get that out to everybody. That will be really important.
So we have another
There's a
wonderful
lot of
question.
unification
There's been
going
some
on.
good questions. Oh, it was Crystal again. Yeah.
Yes, she wants to know, Shay, do you know if anything about the history of Aboriginal birthing and direction placenta trees?
Yes. Placenta trees have become a big thing here now. It is theorized that they would take the placenta and bury it. In some cultures, they did actually keep the placenta. It was a magic thing and they would keep that. So not all placentas were buried. It was buried in some cultures. So it's not as universal as what they thought. I have been to lots of birthing places now. I've made it a real point of speaking to the aunties, and if they like me, they will offer to take me to a birthing place. And they're usually, you can feel them when you walk into them. They're a very, very sacred place. Everything goes still. There's one on Burleigh Hill, which is in the middle of a tourist centre on the Gold Coast, and you walk through it and everything goes quiet still as you walk through, and then you walk out the other side and everything comes back alive again. So there's a big rock, and just the body of the women laying on this rock, it's carved a channel. You can see exactly where the woman's body would sit, and there's a little bit of a channel where the water would break and the afterbirth would come out. So, but no, it was definitely a thing, mob to mob, whether or not the placenta was kept or buried. Yeah, it's not universal. But I love the idea of placenta trees. I've done tree planting with my kids from when I was little, and would have been wonderful to have their placenta and plant a tree on top of it and go forever. That's your tree, sunshine. Yeah. There certainly is evidence here with the medicine trees, like different trees are used for different medicine. Not only will you go to a particular tree at a particular time of year, and you might take the leaves or the bark from one side, not the other, but if there's a tree that you pee on all the time, what happens, and they've proved this now, especially with your garden veggies, if you water your garden veggies with your own urea watered down, is that the plants respond to you. So you can wee on that tree and then come back next year and it will produce the right medicine exactly for your body what your body is needing and lacking, because it reads it and it produces the exact opposite. So the thing that you're missing, it produces. Yeah.
Oh,
So
that's so interesting.
yeah. So yeah, Indigenous medicine is not, there's not a blanket thing that you just use this tree for
So
that or this bush for that. Yeah.
one thing I've seen a lot of discussed in the New Age literature, and
Hmm.
very brief references in the anthropological, because there
Hmm.
a lot of these anthropologists are denied you
Hmm.
initiation. There
Hmm.
seems to be very similar. So, like in various there, it's distinct across the various Aboriginal groups, but we seem to have a codified tradition of going out into the wilderness and starving yourself in order to have a vision and to be
Hmm.
connected to the spirits. And these could either be the
Hmm.
spirits of plants or animals. And this would
Hmm.
usually also define which group you belonged to. So you would be part of the turtle tribe or the wolf
Hmm.
tribe. Do you have anything similar?
Yeah,
Because I
yeah.
know all this
I
stuff
actually
about
have
animals, but I don't.
another book which goes into that a lot, and it's called Indigenous Bush Tucker Etiquette and
Mm,
Culture. So, but you get a birth totem when you're born. So you're given
mm,
one when you're born. You get a marriage totem, but then you can have a totem come to you. Now, what happens in Australia is we have a thing called walkabout. So if somebody's upset with something or somebody's upset with you, you might get sent on walkabout, which is you get sent away from the mob and you've got to go walking by yourself. Or you can go walk about by yourself. And it used to happen, like in the 70s, we used to have some amazing Indigenous athletes. And in the middle of their contract, they'd get drunk, have a fight with their wife, and they'd just go walk about and not turn up for the next match because they're trying to sort out what's going on in their life. Yeah, but there's like a lot of teenage boys in traditional culture, if they were in conflict in the mob, it was like, mate, you go walk about for a while, sort yourself out. And if they survived by themselves, because they would go through, because the whole mob's not there to provide food for you, you've got to
right.
provide it for yourself. So, but it's also that reconnection with nature. And the
Hmm.
3 days I mentioned before that I spent up on Springbrook, I didn't take any food with me.
Hmm.
I just made a nest. They call it my nest. I laid down a whole lot of tree fern fronds and sort of slept in that. Um, there's plenty to drink up there, but by the end of the 3 days, I was finding things to eat. But I was given plenty of visions, and yeah, even seeing the dragon's eye come up over. It's very, very high spot, and it looks like the end of the world. And when the mists come in, yeah, and hearing things walk around me and growling, yeah. But yeah, my totem is the white kite, which is a bird that flies completely stationary in the air over here, hovers and then goes down. And I had seen it around me a lot when I was little, but it became obvious. It was hovering over me a lot while it was there. So I pay attention to that. My husband's is the kookaburra. Kookaburra saved his life. So now in the bush, you can never eat your own totem. You're not allowed to. It's like eating your family.
Hmm.
Basis of all ethics on the planet is don't eat your own. Yeah. So, but yeah, you can be given a totem. You can discover a totem, and you will be given marriage totems as well, because that stopped inbreeding within the tribes. Only kangaroos are allowed to marry kookaburras. And that way you didn't get inbred.
Oh,
But gee,
interesting.
Crystal Angel's coming up with some good questions. I like it. Mm.
Hmm.
I won't be able to stay too much longer, guys,
Okay.
because we've got to hit the road. I can see left my husband
We can
asleep in
wind
the
down
tent,
here.
which is now packed up. So it'll be soon time for me to go. So are there any final questions before we go?
Yeah, so any questions from the audience, let us know. I mean, we do have one from Crystal here. So she says, so the women used hollowed out trees, often river red gums, for a safe, secluded place for them to give birth. Was it not safe where they were to give birth? So what do you think?
Birthing sites. So, like usually when a woman's getting close to giving birth. Now, the hollowed out red gum things I have heard. I think that was just an emergency thing because most of the time when the woman was coming to term, the women would all go off together as she was getting close. So they would start heading down to the birthing site when she was getting close. And they'd stay there. They'd camp around the birthing site until she gave birth. It wasn't just like, oh, she's in labour, let's go. So I think if a woman went into labour preterm, they would find it wasn't necessarily a red gum. It wasn't necessarily hollowed out. Like a woman would put her back to the tree and in a C shape, and the women would gather around. But the preferred place for everything that was just nice and sacred was the birthing places. Yeah, and every mob that had a songline had a place that was a birthing place. So there's very few of them that remain. So the ones
Wow.
that do in our national parks and things like that are very valued now.
Do you have any final comments or questions for Shay about her book or about any of this Australian spirituality, Leslie?
Oh well, I just thought of one. Do they use animals in the medicine or just plants? And if they use animals, do they use venoms?
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. And you got to be careful not to overdose with things. Um, there's not a big culture of mind altering things, although the acacia is. They certainly knew about mushrooms that grew around here, but no, the venoms were used. The whole animal was used, and a lot of the animal is used for medicine. I mean, good medicine. I mean, obviously the kangaroo bone is medicine, strong medicine for the
Oh,
Kadicha.
oh,
Yeah,
I didn't know.
and also sometimes parts of dead human, like
Okay.
an ilpuranja, an ilpurania. Oh, let me get that right. Ilpuranja, right? Who is like the female equivalent of a Kadicha. She didn't always have feather feet, and she didn't always point the bone, but you could always tell them because they would often make belts out of the combings or the cuttings from hair from their mother. And these belts were highly prized because sometimes they're generational. But the magic men or women would dye theirs bright red, so they have a bright red belt. So hair was considered magic as well.
Oh, wow. We
Mhm.
have one other
Yeah,
question
medicine.
here. Shay, do you know if there are any stories or traditions for changing the weather?
Yes, singing. They'd sing the weather in. Most often they live with the weather. Like they know the weather, they can feel the weather coming. But like Tidlik is very much about changing the weather, ending a drought with humour, right? So everybody gets very when it's hot. So you've got to be happy. You've got to be happy. So they would sing happy songs and have happy corroborees. And but yeah, no, singing, the old rain, rain, go away, come again another day. It's
Very
all
common.
comes, yeah, the singing weather in and out is very much in their tradition. So if something, and they don't interfere with weather much, but if it's late or early, they would sing to it. There's more stories, more dreaming stories about Indigenous people saving European Australians who have built in a flood area. And they look at them and go, they're going to get flooded. And they used to make a thing called a bark canoe, which is like a stand up paddleboard. And
Mm.
so, especially in Victoria, there's a gentleman who has a statue erected to him, Yarry of the Wiradjuri. And Yarry came down on his bark canoe and he was rescuing all these people and taking them to shore on their bark canoe, going, why you people built there? Floods every year, floods every 5 years. So, yeah. So
Oh,
there's dreaming
wow.
stories about coping with extremes in weather as well. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful. So for
Yeah.
our final question here, Christy's asking again, is there any more hair mythology? You
Oh,
know,
hair's very sacred. Yeah. It was, a lot of people think that hair was used for just string for hunting and fishing and things like that. No, it was generally kept and used. Like, so when you're brushing your hair or combing your hair, or cutting your hair, you keep it. You keep it in a bag and they roll it together and they make these long strings and they couldn't understand what the strings were for. And the belts that they wore, because they didn't wear much else, your belt would indicate your place in society. Right. So if you become a mother, if you had your initiations and things like that, and these were hair belts. And to this day, even if, like Donnie, my friend whose father was Kadaitcha, he showed me the hair belt that had his mother, his grandmother, his great grandmother's like ancestors back. And for it to be shown that is a great deal of trust, because you never
Oh,
let that
wow.
get into anybody else's hand, because that's power from your family. Hair equals power. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Shay, and thank you, Leslie,
Mm,
for joining. This has been
Thank you.
so
mhm,
incredible.
Delightful.
mhm,
Is there
mhm.
any final words you want to leave us with about your book? What's the title,
Well,
the working title, I
keep your
think?
fingers crossed. Do some magic for me. Wish that it gets picked up, because I think it's important. But I'll give you a link to the Bush Tucker book, it's got a lot of culture in there. I wrote that because I take people on country and try and teach them culture and how to live in harmony. And they needed, if they're going to interact with the elders, they needed to learn how to do it politely according to Indigenous etiquette. So it started out as an etiquette book, and then people kept asking me about Bush Tucker. So I put it all in one. Um,
Beautiful.
so I'll put a link for that. It's available at most bookstores. So if you go in and go Shay deMontford Bush Tucker, you should be able to find the book. But
Mhm.
I'll try and track down an Amazon link and I'll send it to you. And I'm sure somebody's selling it on Amazon.
Perfect. So everyone, send Shay your best wishes. Check her out on Amazon. Support her on YouTube, Magic
Yeah.
Magazine. Support our dear friend Leslie. Send her an email, leslie.celine@yahoo.com, if you want magical
Mhm.
workings with her. So thank you, beautiful ladies. This has been a wonderful time.
Thank
Uh,
you. Dee.
any final words, Leslie, before we go?
No. See you in class. Is there a class
I think
today?
so. There should
No.
be. I'm a day behind, and I've been catching up. I haven't been able to
Me
join,
too.
so.
Hopefully there's not class tonight at 4 a.m., but the next day.
Fingers crossed.
All right.
All right, everyone. Much love.
See you
Take
there.
care, and
Every
Bye.
blessing, guys.
bye.
Thanks.